Welcome and good morning.
Good morning!
I am Hillary Ritz. I serve on the Board of Trustees and on the Worship Committee for Emerson, and I will be your worship associate this morning. Our minister, Reverend Prue, is away this Sunday, and our guest speaker is Professor John Gillespie, who will be speaking to us about the social justice work of Trappist monk Thomas Merton. Dr. Gillespie, if you would please join me up here for a moment while I introduce you, so they can all see your face. Dr. Gillespie is a professor of history and humanities. He also serves on the board of the International Thomas Merton Society of Houston, which is an interfaith organization committed to the exploration of Thomas Merton's life and thoughts. Their goal is to build knowledge, cultivate community, foster contemplative awareness, encourage interfaith encounters, and inspire just living. John has contributed essays to American Religious History, Sinsect, the C.S. Lewis Journal, and the Merton Annual, and he has an article that will be appearing in the Ray Bradbury Review later this year. Thank you, John. Thank you all for being here with us, whether you're joining us in the pews or online. Starting January 7th, there is a 9-week series of religious education classes for adults. It will happen in our usual 10 a.m. time slot in room 208. It's called Faith Forward, and it will help deepen your understanding of UU, Emerson, and yourself. This Thursday at 7 p.m. will be the winter solstice celebration. Please join us for a family-friendly service of music, readings, and candlelight. After the service today, you are welcome to join us for coffee and conversation here in our gathering place just outside the sanctuary. Or if you're online, you can join the other online attendees for social time on Zoom, hosted by Marilyn Rambo. More about that at the end of the service. And if you'd like to join us for lunch today, that will be at 12:15 at Jason's Deli at Augusta and Westheimer. All Emerson members, visitors, and friends are invited to attend. Any visitors who are among us in person this morning are invited to fill out our yellow visitor card in the pew in front of you. I don't seem to have one to wave around. There we are. So that you can receive more information about Emerson and all our activities. You can place it in one of the offertory baskets in the front or back of the sanctuary, either during the offering or after the service. And welcome to Emerson. And speaking of, if you're new to UU or interested in getting to know Emerson, we are interested in getting to know you. There will be a session after the service on December 31st. Is that right? Yes, December 31st at 12:15 in the library, room 203, to explore Emerson and Unitarian Universalism, and light refreshments will be served. And now please enjoy our prelude as we formally begin our service. There's going to be more of that to come. Artem is treating us today. As we gather in community, we look within ourselves and to each other for strength, restoration, and inspiration, so that as we journey together, we catch the spark of the eternal spirit, and from that spark, we light our chalice flame. Lighting the chalice flame symbolizes to all that the spirit of our congregation is strong, and that our will to transform ourselves and the world is also strong. We light the flame with gratitude, We light the flame in memory of all who have gone before, in honor of all who are here now, and with joy for all who are yet to come. As Dr. Gillespie lights our chalice flame here in the sanctuary, I invite those of you joining us from home to also light a candle or chalice of your own. This morning and for the month of December, our chalice lighting words come from now retired UU minister Victoria Safford. Reverend Safford served congregations in Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Iowa over her 30-year ministry. Please join me in reading these words together, if they appear on your screen. Now is the moment of magic, when people, beaten down and broken, with nothing left but misery and candles and their own clear voices, kindle tiny lights and whisper secret music. As we work to create beloved community, we welcome all who would join us in building a better world with more love, more justice, and more peace. We welcome all who would join us in growing in mind, heart, and spirit. We welcome all who would join us in tearing down systems of oppression of all kinds. We welcome all who would join their purposes to ours in a loving spirit of right relationship. Now please also join me in reading the words of our welcome. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, wherever you find yourself on your life's journey, whichever your pronouns, whether you've walked in or rolled in or dialed in, whomever you love, you are welcome here. It is important that we acknowledge that our history is a shared and harmful one. Our congregation's buildings are situated on the home of the Karankawa and the Atakapa peoples for at least 2,000 years before European settlers arrived and very nearly brought about their end. May we recognize, uplift, and support Indigenous voices and communities in our work as a congregation. Each time we are gathered, we hear words from one of the 6 sources of Unitarian Universalism. Our readings today were selected by our guest speaker, Dr. Gillespie, and are written by Thomas Merton. The first reading is Thomas Merton's Fourth and Walnut Epiphany. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being man, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me now that I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this. But it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, where neither sin, nor desire, nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. But this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a peculiar gift. And now, with our chalices lit and our hearts and minds centered, we will sing our opening hymn. You may stand if you are comfortable or stay seated, but please help us raise our voices and sing number 317, We Are Not Our Own, from the Gray Hymnal. Like many other communities of faith, Emerson collects an offering each week, but our offering is not for our church, which is supported by the annual pledges of our members. We collect our Sunday offering to give to others, because we know that giving is both a transformative spiritual act and an important way to live our values. 75% of today's offering will go to our December Share the Plate recipient, which is the minister's discretionary fund. This fund is established by you, the members of this church, to aid each other and, from time to time, the larger community. It is administered by our minister at his discretion. The remaining 25% of today's offering will go to Interfaith Ministries Meals on Wheels, which provides thousands of meals every day to Houston's homebound seniors. You can go to our webpage for online giving, put cash or a check in our offering basket, or mail a check to the church. And today's offering music is a little longer than usual because Artem is making it cool. Yeah, what a treat. Thank you, Artem. I invite you now to relax and settle yourselves comfortably for a few minutes of contemplation. First, let's take a deep breath and release all our tension and stress as we let it out. And one more time for good measure. Today's meditation is also inspired by Thomas Merton. He writes the following: "The true contemplative is not the one who prepares his mind for a particular message that he wants or expects to hear, but one who remains empty because he knows that he can never expect or anticipate the word that will transform his darkness into light. He waits on the word of God in silence." Now, many of us would not choose exactly that language to wait on the word of God. So think for a moment on what you do feel comfortable waiting on. Perhaps you would wait on the word or the presence of your gods, plural, if you're polytheistic. Perhaps you will wait for the wisdom of nature that is living and breathing beneath the floor of our sanctuary and outside our windows. Perhaps you will wait for the kind of insight that arises from your subconscious when you are quiet enough to let it happen. Let us now wait together in silence. Amen, and blessed be. Our second reading today is also from Thomas Merton. This one is called "The Time of No Room." It is a reference to Christmas and the coming of Jesus when there was no room at the inn. For those of us who don't particularly resonate with the story of Jesus, we can listen to this while contemplating the spirit of compassion or kindness in place of the name of Christ. Into this world, this demented inn, in which there is absolutely no room for him at all, Christ comes uninvited. But because he cannot be at home in it, because he is out of place in it, and yet he must be in it, his place is with those others for whom there is no room. His place is with those who do not belong, who are rejected by power because they are regarded as weak, those who are discredited, who are denied the status of persons, tortured, exterminated. With those for whom there is no room, Christ is present in this world. He is mysteriously present in those for whom there seems to be nothing but the world at its worst. I now invite Dr. Gillespie to the pulpit for his talk, Thomas Merton, From Favorite Son to Problem Child.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me out here. Thanks to Dr. Lofton for suggesting me to the worship committee, and certainly thanks to Hillary for arranging all of this. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. When I tell people that I spent 2 years in graduate school buried under the books and the poems and the essays of Thomas Merton, I usually get the same response. People nod knowingly before furrowing their brows and saying, "Thomas Merton, And now, who's that again? He was born in France in 1915. He lived in England as a kid, and he moved to New York to attend Columbia University, where he got his master's degree in literature. In 1938, after a full life of, let's just say, debauchery, he converted to Catholicism, and in 1941 took holy orders at Our Lady of Gethsemane, which is a Trappist monastery outside of Louisville, Kentucky. He wrote nearly 70 books, over 1,000 poems, and countless more essays. Merton began his public career with the publication of The Seven-Story Mountain, which is probably his best-known work, an autobiography of faith, which critics have applauded for its lucidity and its fidelity to orthodoxy. Fast forward to 1968. Merton died of accidental electrocution in Bangkok after finishing an address to an assembly of Buddhist monks on the improbable topic of monasticism and Marxism. So I hope that you'll gather from this little introduction that Merton's life and thought has quite a dramatic arc, hence the title of my talk today. In 25 minutes or so, I hope to trace Merton's life as a favorite son of the church to a problem child who still makes some conservative-minded Christians uncomfortable. So I want to begin with the day that Merton took holy orders. It was December 10, 1941. Now, this is just a few days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States had just entered the global conflict that would in time claim the lives of 38 million people. But that was nowhere on Merton's mind. He closed the door behind him, and he disappeared into the cloister, and he thought he was saying goodbye to the world and all of its problems. He wrote in his autobiography, "I was free from all the anxieties and worries and sorrows that belong to this earth and the love of the things that are in it. So the world can go blow itself up. I'm out of here." Merton also believed he was free from the demands of his own ego. Taking holy orders meant that he would have to give up his lifelong dream of becoming a poet and a novelist. Such pursuits were much too narcissistic for a humble man of the cloth, or so he thought. But after Merton produced a few written devotions for his fellow monks, his superiors recognized his talent and encouraged him to take up the pen. And in 1948, The Seven-Story Mountain appeared on bookshelves everywhere, selling up to 600,000 copies by the end of 1949. So the church was surprised but not displeased by the Seven-Story's success, and Merton's superiors assumed the unofficial role of copy editor, and they quickly sought to brand the author, showcasing him as an accessible and yet reliably orthodox Catholic voice, a sort of monastic Bishop Fulton Sheen. Merton gained a readership with people across the world, Protestants and Catholics alike, but he also sounded some clear notes of conservatism that's characteristic of the pre-Vatican II church. So take, for example, this uncomfortable passage from a book called Seeds of Contemplation, hastily produced as a follow-up work to The Seven-Story Mountain in 1949. Here, Merton writes disapprovingly of them. Do not read their newspapers. Keep beyond the reach of their radios. Do not bother with their unearthly songs, and do not complicate your life by looking at the pictures in their magazines. Well, still, I think that much of what Merton wrote between 49 and, say, 60 does make for some good spiritual reading. Some recommendations. The Ascent to Truth is a meditation on St. John of the Cross. No Man is an Island is an engagement with existentialism, and a very thin volume called Praying the Psalms contains bite-sized snatches of wisdom that I personally love whenever I'm stuck in a waiting room. But Merton's mid-50s books are, well, perfectly theologically safe. All of them bore the seal nihil obstat, which is loosely translated, nothing wrong here. Things began to change in 1958 when Merton had an experience that became the turning point in his life and in his outlook on the world. It happened like this. While he was standing on a crowded street corner in Louisville's shopping district, Merton paused to people watch, to take a look at the folks that were rushing by, hurried and distracted and unaware. And he recalled, and this was in our readings this morning, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. This sense of liberation from an illusory experience was such a relief and a joy to me. I have the immense joy of being a man, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate. Merton scholars see this pivotal moment in Merton's life as a time of radical change. Some people believe that he betrayed the vision of the seven-story mountain and began walking a path that would have led him out of the Catholic Church and maybe even out of Christianity. I do not believe that Merton's writings after this Fourth and Walnut Epiphany demonstrate a movement away from faith, but rather a growing into or a deepening of faith. I would say that this is the day that he became truly Catholic in the true sense of the word, which is to be a universalist. However we want to characterize this Fourth and Walnut experience, it's clear that Merton would not be the same. He no longer held to the belief that the religious life is superior to the secular life, or that priests and monks have any special charism that's unavailable to everybody else. And so he started to rewrite some of his works. He rewrote Seeds of Contemplation as New Seeds of Contemplation in 1961. In the update, he scrapped all that us versus them language and replaced it with beautiful passages such as this one. The whole idea of compassion is based on a keen awareness of the interdependence of all these living beings, which are all part of one another and all involved in one another. Merton also began keeping different company. From his lonely spot in the Kentucky woods, he corresponded with fellow Catholic Dorothy Day, the Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Herschel, the Buddhist scholar D.T. Suzuki, the Russian novelist Boris Pasternak, and the environmentalist Rachel Carson. He was supposed to meet face-to-face with Martin Luther King, but the date kept getting pushed back. Merton and King had finally settled on a time in mid-April 1968 after King attended to some business in Memphis. Merton's change in attitude is best reflected in one of his letters to Dorothy Day in 1961. He said, "I just don't feel that I'm called in conscience at a time like this to go on writing just about things like meditation. I cannot just bury my head in a lot of tiny and secondary monastic studies either. I have to face the big issues, the life and death issues." Now, Merton's change began to worry some of the people that were around him, especially some of the people within his own religious community. After all, he was talking to some pretty suspicious folks, Protestants and Buddhists, for example. And then there's all that chatter with Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Worker. Did you hear that? The Catholic Worker. So leftist. Merton's writings raised a few eyebrows as well. He no longer confined his poetic voice to quiet topics like the saints and contemplation. He published essays that addressed the pressing social and political issues of the day: racial justice, poverty, capitalism and consumerism, interfaith dialogue, environmentalism, and war. He published essays with titles like Red or Dead, The Anatomy of a Cliché, or Letters to a White Liberal, or The Meaning of Malcolm X, all of which drew some critical attention from the upper ranks of the church hierarchy. Now, the church had always edited Merton's works and sometimes suggested that certain racy or otherwise provocative passages be removed. But in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Merton noticed that his essays were being returned to him with heavier black lines running through entire paragraphs and even pages. Some essays were denied publication altogether. In 1961, Merton wrote to a friend, "I realize that I have to be very careful how I protest because otherwise I will be silenced. And no doubt sooner or later I will be silenced." The topic that was the most alarming was Merton's growing criticism of U.S. foreign policy, especially the arms race. Merton had arrived through his reading of Christian tradition that the church's historic teaching on the just war, a doctrine that stretches all the way back to St. Augustine, was no longer applicable. The realities of atomic war, the complete destruction of entire cities or civilizations can, he said, in no way be justified by Christian doctrine. In November of 1961, Merton declared himself in opposition to and in non-cooperation with nuclear war, and he urged his church to do the same. Now, this was not what many within the church wanted to hear. It had been centuries, and the church had always been political outsiders. Catholics had finally began to gain acceptance as reliable cold warriors, as Catholic opposition to atheistic communism had won them a place at the table. And in 1960, Americans even elected John F. Kennedy, the first Catholic president. So apologists did theological backflips to assure the faithful that they could be followers of Jesus and still embrace a policy called MAD, or mutually assured destruction. Merton's superiors began to wonder how their favorite son, once the standard bearer of sound doctrine and stability, had become the church's problem child, whom many devotees now called an activist, a leftist, and even a communist. One particularly harsh comment came from the official newspaper of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. In a long and angry editorial, Merton was accused of a startling disregard for authoritative Catholic utterances. In January of 1962, as Merton was preparing to send his magnum opus on war, Peace in the Post-Christian Era, off to his publisher, he received a letter from the Trappist abbot general in Rome. Its message was clear. Merton was to cease publication immediately on anything related to war. And furthermore, the abbot continued, saying his activism falsified the message of monasticism. Merton had been officially silenced. The authorities of his order would hear no more from this pacifist monk, this enemy of the state, this upstart madman who dared bite the hand that blessed him. Merton was not so easily dissuaded, though. He approached his immediate supervisor, the abbot of Gethsemane, James Fox, and asked for a bit of clarification regarding the order from Rome. Indeed, they decided, or perhaps colluded, the censure that forbid Merton from publishing really didn't say anything about writing. After all, one can write without seeking publication, right? Just a nuance of difference. And so therefore they concluded that there was certainly nothing wrong with sending his slim 165-page book, Peace in the Post-Christian Era, off to, and this is a quote, a few friends. So I'm going to give you a short list of Merton's friends: Jim Forrest, Dorothy Day, Father Daniel Berrigan, Hildegard and Jean Gosmeyer, Father Jacques Merton, Etta Gulick, Ethel Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, and Cardinal Montini of Milan, later Pope Paul IV, and Pope John the 23rd. A few friends, right? Merton scholars have not yet been able to say just how many people made it to Merton's friends list. But we can say that once the die was cast, Merton interpreted the terms of his censure with increasing liberty. When the editor of the Peace Bulletin Pax offered to publish part of Merton's banned book, Merton responded, "I think that if you just lifted a paragraph here and there, there'd be no real objection." We also know that a copy reached Bishop John Wright of Pittsburgh, who decided to run off a few copies of his own and carry them to Rome, where he put them in the hands of the bishops who presided at the Second Vatican Council. And here is the heart-stopping conclusion of this story. When Vatican II concluded in 1965, the Catholic Church had reconfigured its relationship to the world. The Church acknowledged the authenticity of other faith traditions, including Protestants and Eastern Orthodox churches, and the phrase perfidious Jews was at last blotted out of the Church's liturgy. And the Church opened itself to the discussion of women's rights, workers' rights, and economic reform. But I want to point out that one of the most significant of the Church's documents is Pacem in Terris, or Peace on Earth. It was written by Pope John the 23rd, not to the Church, which is the custom, but rather to all men and women of goodwill. The Pope spoke explicitly about matters of war and peace, and Pacem contains the phrase, "The arms race should cease, and nuclear weapons should be banned." Period. It became widely but unofficially acknowledged that Thomas Merton, the muffled monk from Kentucky, was in fact the ghostwriter of one of the Church's most powerful statements on the dignity of human life and its unequivocal statement on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And Merton scholars have pointed out that several passages in Pacem in Terris are undeniably similar to those in Peace in the post-Christian era, and some even seem to be plagiarized. In many ways, however, the Church's pilgrimage to Pacem in Terris remains an embarrassment to some. There has not been, as far as I know, an official ecclesiastical recognition of Merton's contribution. And the ban on peace in the post-Christian era remained in effect until 2004. So with the time remaining, I hope to draw some applications from the, history lesson that I've just given. And you know, I'm really a history professor and not much of a preacher. So let me frame this little conclusion not as commandments from the pulpit, but rather as things I'm working on, and maybe you can relate. So first, Merton's path to awareness required that he drop the ego. He spent the first few years in the monastery thinking of himself as somebody special, even somebody superior to everybody else. Most of us have to live out an undignified existence in the secular world, but he was suited to a higher purpose, or so he thought. But in his fourth and walnut epiphany, which I included as one of today's readings, opened his eyes to the reality of human solidarity, our essential unity before each other and before God. Merton wrote, "Love is our true destiny. We do not find the meaning of life by ourselves. We find it with another." Secondly, I think we can recognize that our essential unity with other people prohibits us from opposing them as despicable others who must be defeated and silenced, but as fellow seekers who can be redeemed. Merton ultimately pursued reconciliation and not victory. We have heard Martin Luther King's famous quote, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." When approaching our adversaries or those who we have identified as such, what is our goal? Do we seek unity in truth or victory at any cost? I also recognize that Merton's struggle was not with a totalitarian system of monolithic evil. His disagreement was with his church, his family, the mother who had nurtured him, brought him to faith, equipped him for the battle that he faced. He wanted to end his struggle as friends. And finally, I think that Merton's experience encourages us to expect transcendent or divine encounters where we least expect them. And I know that sounds maybe a little paradoxical. I think that what Merton teaches us is to allow the veil separating what is holy and what is profane to fall. And when we do, we recognize that everything is holy. Everything bears an imprint of divinity. In my tradition, my faith tradition, which is the Episcopal tradition, some of us are exploring a concept of the divine that transcends perhaps traditional theism. And if you don't know what that means, it's okay. Theism gives us a vision of God that fits well into a Cecil B. DeMille film. It's an anthropomorphic sky god who looks and acts very much like we do. He, and he is usually male, shares human loves, hates, and prejudices. And he is easy to get along with because he doesn't challenge us or ask us to move out of our comfort zone. As the cheeky spiritual writer Anne Lamott wrote, you can safely assume you've created a God in your own image when it turns out that God hates all the same people that you do. But an alternative vision is known as panentheism, not to be as a shade of difference from, say, pantheism, and you can Google it later, but panentheism suggests that we cannot see the divine nor understand at a cognitive level him, her, both, or neither, or all. But we can see creation, and every aspect of which contains the imprint of eternity. I think that the poet William Blake is getting close when he wrote, "To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour." Panentheism urges us to look upward, not upward, toward a powerful, thunderbolt-wielding God, but downward to the terrestrial and to what's right in front of us. And so I'll leave you with this passage, which I think bears repeating as many of us are preparing for Christmas time. It works well as a Christmas reading, which is why I included it, but I don't think it will appear on any Hallmark card. Into this world, this demented inn, in which there is absolutely no room for him at all, Christ comes uninvited because he cannot be at home in it, because he is out of place in it, and yes, he must be in it. His place is with those others for whom there is no room. His place is with those who do not belong, who are rejected by power because they are regarded as weak, who are discredited, who are denied the status of persons tortured and exterminated. With those for whom there is no room, Christ is present in this world. He is mysteriously present for those for whom there seems to be nothing but the world at its worst. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gillespie. And now please join us in singing our closing hymn, number 414, as we leave this friendly place in the gray hymnal.
we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
You can be seated. Each time we come together, we move. We move with the words we hear. We move with the music we hear. We move with the light of the chalice, which, like us, flickers and flutters from side to side, moving constantly, yet tethered to its source. We extinguish our chalice now, not as a symbolic ritual, but as a practical act. We do this because the flickering and fluttering light of our congregation is carried within each of us. Those who are present, those who are not, those who left this community long ago, never to return, and those who have yet to arrive. We are grateful for your presence this morning. For those of you who have joined us on YouTube, after the postlude, we'll be ending our live streaming service. Please feel free to join us on Zoom for our online social hour. The link is in your weekly email and will appear on a slide at the end of the service. And you can also scroll down a bit on your screen on YouTube and look for the link on the left. And I now invite Dr. Gillespie to come and extinguish our chalice for us. May we, in the course of our week to come, be able to feel the liberating freedom of this religious path we share. May our gods welcome us. May they challenge us to live up to our own expectations of ourselves, wherever and whatever they are. And may the world around us light up so that we may see our way back to clarity and wholeness. Amen, and blessed be. And finally, our postlude.